Hello, in this tutorial we will talk about access modifiers. Access modifiers are keywords in object-oriented programming languages. Those keywords set the accessibility of classes, methods, and attributes. Access modifier types are private, default or package modifier, protected, and public. And note that I mentioned them in ascending order according to their accessibility level. Private has less accessibility level than package. Package has less accessibility level than protected, and protected has less accessibility level than public. Let's perform practical sample using access modifiers. Let's now create a package and let's name it pkg1, for example, and inside this package let's create a class and let's name it person. Finish. Okay, let's add attributes to the class person. String name, int age, double height. Let's also add some methods to the class. Let's say void m1, and inside it let's do anything. Let's type control space. As we notice, inside this method we can access the age attribute, we can access the height attribute, and also we can access the name attribute. So let's, for example, say name equals m1, and in the next line let's, for example, print the name attribute as shown. Let's also add another method. Let's make it int my age, and let's make it return. Let's type control space. As we see, it also can access our attributes, so let's return age plus 1, for example. Let's also add another attribute which is double. Let's say it my height, for example. Okay, and let's make it return, for example, height minus 1. As we notice, the class attributes can be accessed by the class method, as we see. So you can access the name attribute inside a method. In another method you could access another variable which is age. In another method you also could access another variable which was height. Okay, but the question here is, can I access a class variables in another class? The answer is yes. We already did that in previous tutorials when we were adding another class, and we make inside this class our main method, and inside the main method we were, as we see, declare a variable from the class, and let's initialize it, and we can access its attributes by typing p dot, as we see, dot age is viewed, dot height, and dot name. And you can assign the name attribute by any value. Let's say my name, for example. You can also assign the age attribute by typing p dot age equals whatever, any number. I know that's a very old person, but it's just an example. Let's also assign the height attribute p dot height, and also let him a very huge person, not just old person. So this person will be old and huge. So let's type, for example, 779. It's very huge, but as we know, it's just an example. But the question is now, what is the purpose of this example? The purpose of this example is to show that you can access an attribute of a class inside another class. Now we are inside the main class and we are able to access the attributes of another class, which is person class. Also we can access its method, p.m1 for example, p.myAge, p.myHeight. As we see, they are also can be accessed. Let's now return back to the person class. As we notice, we have declared 3 attributes and 3 methods. But notice that in those attributes and in those methods, we haven't added an access modifier before declaring any of them. And that means that they got by default a package access modifier. So in case a package access modifier, you don't need to type any keyword. To understand this point more, let's add another package. Inside this package, let's add another class. Let's name it min2 and let's have a main method. Inside it, let's declare person. As we see, when we declare the person, an import statement is generated by Eclipse. That's because we are accessing a class from outside package. Let's initialize it. And now let's try to access the attributes inside the class person. Let's type p dot. Look at the difference. You can't access either its attributes or its declared methods, which are m1, myAge, myHeight. Look, those methods are not existed here. And if we tried to copy them from here, as we see, look, you get compilation error. Let's see why. As we see, the field person.name is not visible. And that's because those attributes and those methods are of package access modifier. So they can't be accessed outside the package. Let's remove them now and see, now we are compiling successfully. Let's return back again. And now let's also return back to the person class and let's modify an attribute, age for example, and let's add a private access modifier for it. Let's save. As we see, we got a compilation error in the main class. Let's see the reason of this error. As we see, the same reason, the field person.age is not visible. And that's because the private attribute can't be accessed outside the class. Look at the difference between them, the package and the private, according to their accessibility level. The private attribute or the private method can't be accessed outside their class. But the package attribute or the package method can be accessed outside the class, but inside the same package, not outside the package. And that is the difference between the accessibility level between the private and the package access modifiers. And now let's talk about a higher accessibility level. It is the protected modifier. But to understand it, let's talk a little bit about the inheritance. Taking in our consideration, we will go deep in that point in the inheritance tutorial. In object-oriented programming, when a class X inherits class Y, that means that class X will own all the attributes and the methods occurred inside the class Y. In Java, when a class inherits another class, we use the keyword extends. Let's perform a trial now. Let's create a new class. Let's say student for example and finish. Now we want class student to inherit class person. So let's type the keyword extends and after extends we will type person. So in this case class student inherits the class person. That means that class student will own all the attributes and methods owned by person. Let's add a method to the class student. Let's say, for example, void mStudent. Let's type control space and see whether the attributes and the methods occurred inside the person class can be accessed in student class or not. Let's see. As we see, height can be accessed, name can be accessed, method m1 can be accessed, method mStudent can be accessed, method myAge, method myHeight also can be accessed. But notice that the only attribute that cannot be accessed is the age attribute, and that is because it's private. It is true that class student inherits the class person, but that doesn't mean it can access all attributes and methods occurred inside class person. It is also restricted by the accessibility level. Okay, let's add a new attribute to the class person. Let's for example say int x, and let's set its accessibility level to be protected. That's by typing the keyword protected before the declaration of the variable. Notice that to set attribute or method's accessibility level to be private, you just type the keyword private. To set its accessibility level protected, you type the keyword protected. But to set its accessibility level as a package level, so you don't type any keyword. Let's try to access the variable x in different ways. Let's first start accessing it inside a method inside the same class. As we see, it can access, and that's for sure, because the private modifier and package modifier, which have less accessibility level, can be accessed in that level. Now let's try to access the attribute x outside the person class. Let's go to the main class and let's try to type p.x equals 5. Let's remove the p.age as age is private, so our code will not compile. As we see, x can be accessed successfully. Okay, what if we tried to access it from another package? Let's try and do. Let's type p dot. As we notice, the attribute x also cannot be accessed like the other attributes. So now what is the difference between the protected modifier and the package modifier? Till now we didn't notice any difference. Okay, wait and you will see. And now let's go to the class student, and inside the method mStudent, let's press Ctrl and space to see the accessed attributes. As we see, height and name and also x can be accessed, but that is not strange, as the attributes which are declared as package modifiers are already accessible in that level. So it's not strange that the protected which have higher accessibility level to be accessed in this case. That's true. But now let's try to create another class outside the package. Let's say p2 for example, and let this class to inherit from the person class. Let's add any method, t for example. And now let's press Ctrl space and notice the difference. Have you noticed? X now is accessible in this case. Can you notice the difference between that class P2 and the class student? Do you notice the difference? The attributes, height and name, the methods m1, mStudent, myAge are accessible inside class student, but in class P2 they are not accessible, as we see. But the attribute X is accessible because it has a protected accessibility level. From that, we observe that in package accessibility level, attribute or method cannot be accessed outside the package. The protected attribute and the method are also cannot be accessed outside the package, except only one case, when it is accessed from a subclass. Okay, now there is still a remaining access modifier we didn't use, which is the public. Let's now return back to the class person, and let's make one of those attributes to be public, and that's by typing the keyword public. Let's save, and now let's try to access this attribute from outside the package. Let's try p dot. Do you notice it is accessible outside the package, and that is the only modifier which is accessible outside the package. Let's also return to the class person, and let's set the method m1. Let's set it as public. Let's save all. As we see, p.m1 is also accessible inside the class min2, which is outside our package. Okay, let's now perform another example, but let's perform it with constructors. Do you remember the constructor tutorial? When we mention the keyword new and after that the class name, in that case we are calling its constructor, and we mentioned also that the constructor which has no parameters is created by default in the class, whatever you have typed it or not. But now let's try to make some different thing. Now let's declare constructor. As we see, it is public constructor. Okay, but what if we change it to private? As we see, it caused a problem in all of those classes. That's because we cannot access anything private from outside the class. Let's read the error message. The constructor person with no parameters is not visible. So let's remove the private keyword and make it in the package level. As we notice, inside this main class the compilation problem is solved, and that is because the class person is located inside the same package of the main class. The same reason for the student class, as it is also located with person in the same package, but it's still causing a problem inside the min2 and the p2. And for sure we know the reason that, let's read, the constructor person is not visible, and the reason that we know is we can't access a package modifier outside its package. Let's also see p2. Let's read, implicit superconstructor person is not visible for default constructor, and that is because even you are inheriting a class, you must at least can access its default constructor. So let's modify this constructor and let it protected. Let's save. As we see, the issue is solved inside the p2, but it's not solved inside the min2. That's because it's also not visible for the reason we know. So in order to be visible in all levels, it must be public, so that it is visible in all levels. Okay, in this tutorial we talked about access modifiers and learned the differences between them. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.